This is where we take one topic, unpack it with some curated sources, and, well, give you a shortcut to getting really informed. Today, we're doing something pretty fascinating, courtesy of Next Republic Publisher. We're diving deep into their ebook. It's called Names of Abraham, Jewish Identity Revealed in the Sands of Egypt.
Yeah, and what's really great for you, the listener, is that Next Republic Publisher has made this ebook completely free to download.
That's right. There's a link for it right in the description below this deep dive, so you can grab it easily.
And this ebook, it's compelling because it uses something so, well, everyday, like personal names.
Right, thanks.
To really shed light on this rich, complex history. It's like looking through a window, using names to see Jewish culture and identity in Egypt during the Hellenistic and early Roman times.
Exactly, and it immediately makes you think, right? Like all sorts of questions pop up. What can just choosing a name tell you about a whole culture? How did these names work as cultural markers for Jewish people back then in Egypt? And maybe the biggest surprise, why are some of those, really major biblical names we expect to see, why are they actually quite rare?
Yeah, and what does the overall pattern, the distribution of names, tell us?
It's definitely not just some dry list of names and dates.
No, not at all. The ebook really brings it to life. It shows how these small choices, seemingly small, reflect this whole process of keeping your heritage alive in a really vibrant, multicultural place.
You get those aha moments.
Totally. You suddenly understand the deeper meaning behind naming practices you probably never thought twice about.
Okay, so the ebook kicks things off by talking about just how much symbolic weight names had in ancient cultures, especially in Jewish tradition. They weren't just like random labels for kids.
Absolutely not. The ebook really emphasizes that names could be packed with meaning. They could reflect your family's ancestry, hopes for the child's future.
Signal identity.
Signal identity, yeah. And it even, makes subtle political points. It also introduces onomastics, the study of names,
Right.
and explains how this field gives us these really unique insights into daily life, families, religion, culture, like little linguistic fossils connecting us to the past.
And it points to some key resources, like Tal Alan's big lexicon of Jewish names in late antiquity.
Essential work.
And others, like Ran Zadok. It's amazing how much we know about Jewish life in Egypt, just because so many documents survive there. Papyri, ostraca inscriptions.
Right, things that actually record the names of just ordinary people, not just kings and priests.
So what about things like theophoric elements, those references to God in names?
Well, the ebook makes a really interesting point there. In Egypt, which was dominated by Greek language and culture, actively choosing and keeping Hebrew or Aramaic names, that was a powerful statement, a way to hold on to your distinct identity.
And the flip side, seeing Greek names must mean something too.
Exactly. It suggests some level of cultural integration happening, people navigating between cultures.
The ebook also mentions naming kids after ancestors. That must have really strengthened family ties, especially for people living away from Judea in the diaspora.
Definitely, and it sets the historical scene for us too, tracing the Jewish presence back to the Persian era, then growing significantly under the Ptolemies. Why? Well, economic opportunities, political stability.
Not always voluntary, right?
No, that's a crucial point. Many also came as prisoners or slaves, and all this led to these flourishing Jewish communities all across Egypt.
So, looking at the numbers, the ebook says around 380 Hebrew and Jewish Aramaic names are documented from Greco-Roman Egypt.
Yeah, roughly 230 from the Ptolemaic period, maybe 150 from the early Roman. It sets our time frame about 330 BCE to 200 CE.
A period of huge changes too, both in Judea with the Maccabees and in Egypt.
So the main goal here, as the ebook lays it out, is to unpack these naming patterns in Egypt. What do they tell us about identity, memory, adaptation?
It really drives home that even a personal name holds so much historical and cultural meaning.
Which leads right into a really intriguing part of the ebook. The names we kind of expect, but aren't really there.
Right, that really makes you stop and think. Where are the Moseses, the Abrahams, Davids, Solomons? These are huge figures.
Foundational figures, yeah. But they're surprisingly absent from the records in Egypt during this specific time.
And it's not just Egypt, is it?
No. The ebook points back to Tal Elan's work, showing a similar lack of these great biblical heroes. Abraham, Moses, Aaron, David, Solomon, Elijah. in Palestinian records from the same era. It really makes you wonder why.
And this idea of ghost names is really helpful here.
It is, explaining how some names looked biblical at first glance but turned out to be, well, mistakes, errors in reading the script, or confusion with similar Semitic names, Arabic, Aramaic, Nabatean.
Like Aaron.
Aaron's a perfect example. The name Oshon, or Aaron, found in papyri, almost certainly Egyptian, may be related to the god Horus, not the biblical Aaron, because, frankly, Aaron wasn't a common Jewish name back then.
Okay. And Solomon. Similar story.
Pretty much. Forms like Halamon, Solomon, or Talmon, Solomon, they're more likely Arabic or Aramaic names from the root SLM, meaning peace or well-being. Or maybe Salmon-related Aramaic names.
Not King Solomon.
Probably not. And the ebook even clarifies that Tanmis Salamis in some records is actually the real Jewish name, Salem, a short form of Shelemiah.
Okay, but then there's this fascinating exception the ebook highlights. Abraham.
Yes, this is a bit of a twist. While Abraham is absent in contemporary Palestine, except for references to the patriarch himself,
It does show up in Egypt.
it does, both Ptolemaic and Roman periods. We've got a 3rd century BCE Aramaic ostracon from Edfu, a Greek one from Thebes dated 1554 BCE, and it pops up again later in Roman Edfu.
Wow. So why the general absence of these big names, and why this strange exception with Abraham in Egypt? What are the explanations?
The ebook explores a few possibilities. One is religious reverence. Maybe people avoided using these super sacred names out of respect, or fear of profaning them somehow.
Makes sense. What else?
Family tradition was huge. People often named kids after grandparents, aunts, uncles. That pattern could naturally limit using names from outside the immediate family pool, even famous biblical ones.
All right. And cultural differentiation.
Yeah, maybe some communities deliberately chose not to use certain names to set themselves apart from other groups. And then there's just the idea that naming practices evolve over time.
Like maybe consciously naming after biblical heroes became more common later.
Exactly. The ebook touches on how Moses, Abraham, David, Solomon did become popular later in different periods and places.
So what does this absence tell us about their relationship with the texts back then?
It suggests maybe a different dynamic. Oral traditions, family customs. These might have been incredibly powerful influences, perhaps even more so than widespread reading of texts, which we might assume based on later times.
Right. It paints this picture of a really dynamic culture, shaping identity in many ways. And names, even absent ones, tell a story. So from this big picture, the ebook then zooms in.
It does. To a specific place called Trikomia, a lost village in the Fayum region of Egypt.
What's so special about Trikomia?
The discovery of tax records there from the 3rd century BCE, CPR to Thieth, for those who know the papyri. These records give us an incredibly detailed snapshot of an early Hellenistic Jewish community.
So, Ptolemaic Egypt, an agricultural area, drawing in settlers, including Jews as soldier farmers.
That's the picture. And the ebook credits Willie Clarissa's work, identifying dozens of Jewish names or patronymics in these records. It lets us build this onomastic profile of the community.
And what does that profile look like?
It looks like a community in transition. You see names typical of the earlier Persian period, like Elias, Salamis,
Right.
alongside these emerging Hellenistic names, Joseph, Simon, Ananias, plus Aramaic names showing the linguistic mix.
And it wasn't just men's names, right? Women are in these records too.
Absolutely crucial point. We find names like Miriam, Judith transcribed really interestingly as Iuaditis.
Iuaditis, wow.
Yeah. Sarah, Susanna, Sabbethaios. It's a reminder that women were there, and their names give us vital clues.
And what about family ties? Mixed marriages.
That's also really insightful from the patronymics, the son of or daughter of parts. You see people with Jewish names whose parents had Greek names, and vice versa.
So integration was happening.
It seems so. The ebook even suggests some Greek names might have been seen as equivalents for Hebrew ones, like maybe Pneumonios stood for Haggai, or Agathon for Tovia.
And some specific examples. Women with Jewish names married to men with Greek names.
Yep. Like a woman named Barita married to Thudotos. It shows real cultural interaction. Clarisse suggested these Trikomia Jews might have been like 3rd-generation immigrants arriving maybe around 310 to 290 BCE.
And the language, do they still speak Hebrew or Aramaic?
The transcription suggests they did, that Iuaditis for Yehudit or Sabbatitis for Sabbathit, rendering them that way in Greek implies the Semitic forms were still in use.
So Trikomia is this amazing window.
A unique window, yeah. Into this moment where diaspora communities were adapting but also holding onto older traditions. It wasn't simple assimilation or separation, it was complex.
Okay, so Building on that idea of movement and adaptation, the ebook then looks more broadly at how names traveled, from Judea to Egypt.
Right. Names carry memories of home, but they also change in new linguistic and cultural settings.
And the ebook maps this out geographically across Egypt, Upper Egypt, the Delta, the Fayum.
And notes that the type of place mattered. A big city like Alexandria versus a rural village would likely influence naming choices.
And how did Egyptian patterns compare to Palestinian ones?
This is where it gets really interesting, the idea of fossil names or diasporic conservatism. The prime example is Sabbethaios Shabbathai.
The Sabbath name.
Exactly. Hugely popular in Egypt, but really rare in Palestine at the same time.
Why?
The suggestion is that Egyptian Jews might have consciously held onto, even amplified, this name as a strong marker of their distinct identity in that multicultural setting.
It also talks about different rhythms of change. Some names popping up earlier in Egypt.
Yeah, like Isaac and Jacob seem to gain popularity earlier in Egypt than Palestine. Joseph, though, seems more aligned across both places.
What about the impact of events back in Judea, like a Maccabean revolt?
That had a big impact in Palestine, obviously. Those Hasmonean names, Simon, Judah, Eleazar, Yohanan, Jonathan, Mattathias, surged there after the revolt.
But less so in Egypt.
Much less effect, especially for families who'd been in Egypt for a while already. Simon was present, yes, but maybe for other reasons. Judah was less common. Those distinctively Hasmonean names are rarer or appear later in Egyptian records.
And even within Egypt, there were regional differences.
Right, definitely. Upper Egypt seemed to hold on to older Persian period names more strongly. The Fayum, like Trikomia, looks like a transition zone. Alexandria and the Delta show more Hellenization later on, with Greek names alongside Jewish identity markers in things like tomb inscriptions.
So the key takeaway is that the diaspora wasn't just a pale reflection of the homeland.
Not at all. It was dynamic. Egyptian Jews were adapting traditions in their own distinctive ways. You really need to study both regions to get the full picture of Jewish history then.
Which brings us to another fascinating group of names, the ones the ebook calls secondary biblical characters.
Right. Names like Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Judah, Samuel. They become more common in this Hellenistic Roman period.
Which is striking given the lack of those major heroes we talked about.
Exactly. The ebook maps out the timeline, comparing pre-Hellenistic name lists to later ones. It shows which names were already around, which were rare or absent, and which seem new, like Absalom, Isaac, Levi, and similar patterns for female names like Sarah, Miriam, Shalom-Saran.
And Egypt is key to dating this.
Crucial. It gives us the earliest non-biblical examples for Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph from the Ptolemaic era. Joseph's timeline matches Palestine, but Isaac and Jacob appear earlier in Egypt.
But it questions that label secondary biblical characters. Suggests it might be anachronistic.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't always a conscious let's name him after that guy in the book. Maybe it was more about continuing family traditions, especially when texts weren't widely accessible and literacy wasn't universal.
So what else could explain their growing popularity?
The ebook suggests several things. Shifts in religious focus, maybe more emphasis on the Pentateuch and the patriarchs, a growing sense of collective identity, using names as markers, new ways of interpreting scripture, maybe influence from books like Jubilees or the Greek translations.
And maybe specific resonances, like Joseph in Egypt.
That's a possibility, too. It compares patterns again. Joseph and Simon, popular everywhere. Judah, huge in Palestine, maybe because of the Hasmoneans, but less so in Egypt. Isaac and Jacob adopted early in Egypt.
It really paints a detailed, nuanced picture.
Ultimately, the rise of these names reflects big shifts in Jewish consciousness during a key period of self-definition, strengthening ties to origins while navigating Hellenism with those interesting regional variations.
Okay, let's dive into Sabbethaios again, Shabbathai, and other Sabbath-related names. This seems like a really central piece of the puzzle for Egypt.
It really is. Sabbethaios being the most common Jewish name in Ptolemaic Roman Egypt, yet rare in Palestine. It's a perfect case study of identity and diasporic adaptation through naming.
We know it comes from the Hebrew word for Sabbath that's in the Bible, used back in Elephantine.
Right, and the ebook discusses that potential shift in meaning, from maybe just born on the Sabbath to something more active, one who observes the Sabbath, an identity statement given how incredibly popular it was in Egypt.
And it was widespread within Egypt.
Absolutely. Lower, middle, upper Egypt. Greek records, Aramaic, Demotic, across different places and times.
And just to stress the contrast, how rare in Palestine.
Extremely rare. Eland's lexicon only lists 4 examples. 2 might be fictional, 2 are from Herodian ossuaries, maybe 1 from Syria, No female examples from Palestine at all.
So why so popular in Egypt? What are the theories again?
Asserting identity in multicultural Egypt, where the Sabbath was a really visible difference. Maybe you're responding to challenges to observing the Sabbath. Or maybe the Sabbath itself just took on even greater symbolic weight as the marker of Jewishness in the diaspora.
And we see all the different versions of the name.
Yeah, Sabbethaios, Tabation, Tabbatits. It shows the name interacting with different languages but remaining incredibly important. And there were other, less common Sabbath names too.
What does this tell us about diasporic identity overall?
It highlights this active self-definition focusing on the Sabbath. It shows continuity, even amplification of heritage alongside adaptation. It's like cultural resistance through naming. Sabbethaios is just this amazing window into how a minority group maintains identity.
The ebook then makes sure we don't forget the women. Women have names too.
A crucial chapter. Because women's lives are often obscured in ancient history, and names give us these precious glimpses into their presence in these Jewish communities in Egypt.
Fewer female names recorded maybe, but still a decent amount.
Surprisingly substantial and diverse, yeah. From tax lists like Trikomia, legal papers, family archives, the Xenon archive is mentioned, and later, tomb inscriptions.
That Trikomia was a gold mine for female names too.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Early Hellenistic names like Miriam, Johannes, that Iwudiitis for Judith, Saris for Sarah, Susanna for Susanna, Sabbethaios, maybe even Irilono as a translation for Shalom or Shalom Simshon.
And the ebook looks at the history of some key female names, like Miriam and Sarah appearing early in Egypt.
Yeah, it notes the Trikomia records give us some of the earliest post-biblical occurrences for names like Miriam and Sarah, also early evidence for Shalomshin and Judith, plus Aramaic female names showing up too, reflecting that linguistic diversity.
What about marriage patterns and social roles?
It revisits those cross-community marriages in Trikomia Jewish women with Greek-named husbands, suggesting social integration, and briefly touches on documents showing women involved in legal or economic activities.
So female name choices also tell a story about identity.
Absolutely. Their participation in maintaining identity through tradition, but also innovation. Selective Hellenization. And, of course, women as transmitters of identity, naming daughters after matriarchs or using specific meaningful names. It underscores why studying female names is vital for recovering women's experiences.
Okay, the next section gets into the tricky business of actually identifying these names. Mixtures, confusions, and onomastic ghosts.
Yeah, this is about the real challenges. Transliterations between scripts, names sounding similar but having different origins, homonyms, and just plain misinterpretations that create these ghost names.
Like Aaron and Solomon again.
Exactly. The ebook hammers this home.
Yeah.
Arshin is almost certainly Egyptian, linked to Horus, not biblical Aaron. Talamon and similar forms are likely Arabic or Aramaic. SLM root or Salmon-related, not King Solomon. Both biblical figures just weren't common names then, and it clarifies again that Lamis in Trikomia is the real Jewish name Salem.
And there's ambiguity between Aramaic and Hebrew names.
Lots. Names like Sambus or Barius. You need context, family links, location, explicit identification to figure out if the person was likely Jewish.
And the problem of equivalent names. Greek names meaning the same as Hebrew ones.
Right, like Theodotos for Netnel or Jonathan, Dosithios for Metihahu. So you can't assume someone wasn't Jewish just because they had a Greek name. And some Jews even adopted Egyptian names. Levi is another complex case. Pelias is likely Egyptian Palu, though real Levi's existed too.
So scholars have sometimes gotten it wrong, over or underestimating.
Exactly. Earlier studies sometimes saw any Semitic name as Jewish. More recently, maybe too much caution. The ebook stresses needing careful methods.
What are the tools then?
Cross-checking with Palestinian lists like Zadok's and Elan's, paying super close attention to the document's context. Are they identified as Jewish? Who are their relatives? Where is the document found? What practices are mentioned? Trikomia is used again as a case study for how context reveals a Jewish community, even with mixed names.
Okay, shifting focus slightly. Names and power. The impact of the Maccabees. How did politics back in Judea affect names?
Significantly. The Maccabean revolt, starting around 168 BCE, and the rise of the Hasmonean dynasty really shook up naming patterns in Judea and beyond.
So those dynasty names, Simon, Judah, Eleazar, Yohanan, Jonathan, Mattathias, they took off in Palestine.
Big time. They became much more popular there after the revolt.
But not so much in Egypt.
The impact was way less direct, especially for families already settled in Egypt before the revolt. Simon is there, yeah, but maybe not solely because of the Hasmoneans. Judah is less common. The other distinctively Hasmonean names are rarer or show up mostly in later documents, from the 1st century BCE onward.
So using those names could be a political statement. Loyalty to the Hasmoneans.
That's the interpretation. A shift from just family tradition or general biblical reference to expressing political allegiance.
And this continued later, with Herodian names.
Yeah, names like Berenice, Mariam, Salome. It shows Jewish communities adopting a broader Hellenistic cultural habit, using names tied to ruling dynasties, even while keeping their own distinct Jewish naming traditions.
So where does all this information actually come from? The next section is what was written: bones, papyri, and inscriptions.
Right, it's an overview of the source types. Papyri from Egypt are huge tax records, contracts, letters. Ostraka, broken pottery used for quick notes, receipts.
Ossuaries, those bone boxes.
From the Jerusalem area, yeah. Herodian Roman burials, stone inscriptions, tombstones, synagogue dedications, seals, bullae, even literary sources like Josephus or Maccabees mention names.
But the sources aren't evenly spread out, geographically or chronologically.
Right, and that creates blind spots, especially for the early Hellenistic period in Palestine, where fewer everyday documents survive compared to Egypt.
And there are challenges using these sources.
Definitely. Identifying people as Jewish, if it's not explicitly stated, dealing with different spellings and transcriptions between, say, Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, Demotic, wondering how representative the surviving samples are, recognizing potential biases in different source types.
But despite the challenges,
Modern tools like Illin's lexicon, the CPJ, Corpus Papyrorum Judaicorum, let scholars piece together significant patterns and track how name usage evolved. It gives incredible insights into identity and adaptation.
before wrapping up, the ebook includes that helpful visual glossary.
Yeah, it's great. It pulls together key names found in Hellenistic Egypt, groups them patriarchal names, Sabbath names, female biblical names, Persian period names, gives the meaning, notes the earliest Egyptian occurrences, really helps visualize the data.
Okay, so we reached the conclusion. The name is a cultural ecosystem, tying it all together.
It really does. Summarizing those key patterns about Jewish identity and resilience in Ptolemaic Egypt through their name.
That's selective continuity and innovation.
Right. Cultural resistance through names, like the Sabbath ones, and selective adaptation to Hellenistic culture. It revisits Abraham in Egypt, that intriguing case suggesting a persistent tradition there not seen in Palestinian records of the time, challenging simple explanations like reverence being the only factor.
And it stresses again how vital onomastics is as a research tool.
Absolutely. For getting at aspects of ancient life we might otherwise miss, indicators of cultural or religious change, population movements, attitudes to tradition, even finding lost communities. And it draws parallels to today, how contemporary Jewish communities still navigate identity through names.
So names are cultural ecosystems.
That's the final powerful image encapsulating history, tradition, adaptation, resistance, aspiration, testifying to this enduring identity and the capacity for change in Jewish civilization.
A really fitting end to a truly fascinating deep dive.
Indeed it is.
Well, thank you for joining us on this exploration into the world of ancient Jewish names in Egypt. Remember, this deep dive was based on the ebook Names of Abraham, Jewish Identity Revealed in the Sands of Egypt. And that's courtesy of Next Republic Publisher. And just one last reminder, Next Republic Publisher has generously made this ebook available for free download. You will find that link right in the description below this deep dive.
We hope this offered you a fresh look at history, seeing the personal stories packed into something as simple as a name.
And maybe it leaves you thinking, how do the names we choose today reflect our own cultures, our values, our identities, echoing choices made thousands of years ago in the sands of Egypt? What stories might your own name tell?